The views and opinions expressed by the following program are those of the host, guests, and callers, and are not necessarily those of this station or Webster Rock Hill Ministries, its management, or other hosts or underwriting sponsors. Programs presented by KWRH-LP are for educational and entertainment purposes only.
We're glad you joined us today. This is Arnold Stricker of In Tune. Sans Ellie Wharton. Ellie is doing a couple administrative function things right now, but we'd like to welcome you to In Tune, which is a 2-hour weekly broadcast. We focus and reflect on issues that impact and connect our community and the greater St. Louis area, and we talk about things like the arts, crime, education, employment, faith, finance, food, history, housing, humor, and justice. In front of me are two famous people from the Webster-Kirkwood Times. We have Dwight Bitikofer, who is the publisher of the Webster-Kirkwood Times, and Don Corrigan, who is the editor of the Webster-Kirkwood Times. Gentlemen, welcome to In Tune. We're glad to have you here.
Thank you. Well, thanks for your invite, Arnold.
We, this is the 40th anniversary of a paper that has endured the how any business starts, where you're really involved in doing everything, to the point now you have, over 25 employees?
About 26, yeah, that's what we are at currently.
And 3 newspapers, the Webster-Kirkwood Times, let me get this right here,
South County Times, and
the
West End Word.
West End Word, right.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about, over 40 years, you've seen a lot, you've heard a lot, you've done a lot. Talk about the origins of the paper and how that kind of kicked off and why that kicked off that way, and how did that come about?
Well, there were several of us who were older students at Webster College, now Webster University, who worked together in the student newspaper. And J.B. Lester was one of those, and we all graduated about a semester apart. So J.B. Lester, Maureen Ziegel, and I started the Webster Times, it was called then, in July of 1978. JB graduated and rented this little writing studio in the Gorlock building and decided we were going to do a newspaper, and decided I was going to help him. I had been business manager of the student paper, and which included selling advertising for the student paper. So we started, and we started as a monthly, and put out a paper in July 13, 1978, and put out another one in August. Then I think we had a combined September or October issue or something. But that was the time when Don Corrigan came to teach at Webster College and teach journalism at Webster College, and I met Don one day at Belcher Typewriter Store on Lockwood, and Don came over and checked out the paper and decided to write a story.
Yeah, we were both high-tech guys, and, so typewriters were like, something that we both loved, and that was the beginning of a bond with the newspaper.
Yes, Selectric typewriters were the real Cadillac
I think most of the typewriters were manual.
These were manual. I had a little manual Smith Corona portable.
So, yeah, that was an experience, because I'd just come down from Lewis University in South Chicago area, where I started a newspaper with some friends there, and I said, never again will I be doing 2 jobs. And no sooner did I get to St. Louis than I met Dwight in the typewriter store, and he goes, hey, you want to come and do some writing for us? And I said, well, maybe I'll do a feature occasionally, but it wasn't long before we were all involved in the newspaper business together, and it's been a great ride for 40 years now.
If I remember correctly, your first story was Tony Saputo, the shoe man. It was a shoe repair guy in Lockwood. But
yeah, I kind of fudged on that one because I'd done a shoe repairman up in the Chicago area, so it was easy for me to whip that story off quickly. But,
so when you do things like that, and you say, well, we're going to start a paper, and you've got a typewriter, in reporting or writing stories or selling ads and things like that, it's all part of that. But then there's the printing, there's the distribution portion. How did you go about getting all the printing done and the typeset? And because it wasn't like it is nowadays.
Correct. We went over and talked to a printer in Waterloo, Illinois. And I don't remember why we chose him, but he was encouraging. We had to come up with upfront money. He wasn't going to give us credit. We had to pay for the first issue of printing, and so. Yeah, I think JB came up with a little bit of money, and we borrowed a little bit of money from JB's mom, and so we had money to pay for the upfront printing, but we had our advertising sales had to match at least what it was costing us for printing and typesetting. Typesetting was done. There was somebody and had a shop in the basement of a house on South Rock Hill Road that had these CompuGraphic photo typesetters, and so he did we took our typed pages from our typewriters down to him, and they re-keyboarded them into the photo typesetter and set up galleys for our pages that we then pasted up with hot wax and pasted up on the layout sheets from the printer. And
the worst aspect of that was doing the corrections, because we'd proofread it and then we'd have to go back and have the corrections made at the typesetting business, and then we'd have to get X-Acto knives and we'd have to cut out one sentence lines and then try to paste them evenly, and it was an ordeal putting out a newspaper back then. It's not like now where you've got the Macs and you can correct things on the screen and print things out. This was nitty-gritty, getting your hands in the wax and trying to get stuff pasted up straight.
And same with the ads. You'd use border tape to outline the ads, and then you'd try to get the little copy blocks exactly straight on the ads.
Yeah, there were many evenings we were up there pasting things up past midnight, and fortunately, we had Pica the cat to keep us company when we.
Yeah, we had an office cat for a number of years.
Pica. Yeah. Was there an elite also?
No, we never got elite.
There were no elites in our office. I can tell you.
You're listening to In Tune, KWRH LP. Arnold Stricker with Dwight Bitikofer and Don Corrigan. We're talking about the Webster-Kirkwood Times, which Dwight said the first issue rolled off the presses July 13th, 1978. And for our folks listening, it's the premier source for community news in the St. Louis area. The Webster-Kirkwood Times, South County Times, the West End Word, total circulation, 90,000 households, independently owned and operated for more than 35 years. And it's the largest independently owned chain of newspapers in the St. Louis area. Gentlemen, that's a great feather in your cap.
Independently owned for 40 years.
For 40 years, yes. This is old type. Speaking about type mistakes, 40 years. Yeah, because we're celebrating the 40th year.
Yes.
At the top of the paper there.
Well, a lot of our success has to be because of the decline in all the other newspapers that were around us. For a time we were competing with the suburban journals, which is a pretty formidable operation. They were, the largest weekly newspaper in the entire United States. So that's what we were up against. And then they made a series of mistakes, and we kept the emphasis on local, and I think that's been the key to our success.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because the Journal started to kind of go a little bit more national news, or be like a competitor with the Post-Dispatch. Is that a fair statement?
Well, they sold out to it was local. You had the Donleys and another group.
Yeah, there were two groups, a North group and a South group.
Was it Nordman? Nordman, I think, did.
I don't remember which is which.
Right. And then they sort of combined, but then they sold to Ralph Ingersoll, and he's the one that then tried to compete with the Post. And I think he bought the Globe, and he had all these highfalutin ideas of how he was going to compete and run the Post-Dispatch out of business, but instead he kind of like ran the suburban journals into the ground.
Yeah.
So that was good for us, but every time we see newspapers in decline, I don't think that we've ever been gleeful about
Well,
it.
Lee Enterprises bought the Suburban Journals
Yeah.
eventually. Lee Enterprises, who now owns the Post-Dispatch.
When Ingersoll left the area.
Okay, so you make this kind of getting back to the printing. You make your corrections. You've got your X-Acto knives out. You're taping and gluing and getting everything corrected. Then you take it over to
I drive it over to the printer,
okay.
and I would wait over there for them to print it, and then load it up and bring it back here.
So everything, they have folding machines and
Yes,
kind of
yeah,
like you see the
yeah.
old time movies where it's running off the presses like that and folds them all and puts them in these nice little.
Well, yeah, that still happens.
Yeah, have you
I
seen the
mean,
movie The Front Page? It's like, stop the presses. There's a great scoop breaking somewhere. We've never had to actually do that though where we've had a late breaking story where we've had to stop the presses. But we have had to delay.
We've delayed a couple times going to the printer for
Sure.
a late breaking story, but just by a couple hours. But
If you've got a question you want to ask Dwight or Don, you can text us at 314-736-4510, 314-736-4510. So when you get the papers that are hot off the press, are they bundled up? And then, I know right now we get them, they're in plastic and they're thrown. How did you do it back then? I read something where you piled them into a couple VW Bugs and
the very first issue fit in was a 12-page paper. I think we had 15,000 of them, and we stuffed them into 2 VW Bugs, and then took them to a distributor. We started out with a distributor who did door hanger service. No, we started out in the mail, and then went to a door hanger service, and then, like in 1980, we started going with individual carriers, or maybe 79, we started going with individual carriers and independent contractor carriers that would bag the papers and throw them on lawns and driveways.
We've sort of tried every circulation method known to man, and I think that's one of the things that happens when you kind of start your own business and you're kind of learning while you're going. But it's always been interesting. We could probably tell some good stories about circulation and the issues that we had at the beginning of the paper.
In 1980, we had somebody that came to us and said, "Oh, we can just deliver the paper, for a lot less money than what you're paying to deliver it now." And so they thought they could do the whole thing. We were still every 2 weeks at that point. Then there was this one issue that just didn't get delivered, and an attorney friend and I went out to this guy's house and could see them all bagged and piled in the basement, but not distributed.
oh my gosh.
And we finally, don't remember exactly what, we got permit. Anyway, we eventually got them out of the basement and distributed them ourselves.
That's a fond memory. We were
How long did that take?
we were like throwing out the window, and I kept hitting my arm on the rearview mirror, and I'm going
over a couple of days.
Wow. And you know the streets very well there too. You know where all the turns are and the dead ends.
Well, we got to meet a lot of our readers too, because they were out in the front yard wondering where the paper was.
So how was the response right away to did people call? Did they write? How did you know how people felt? You obviously didn't see a lot of them laying on lawns afterwards.
We cultivated a lot of contacts through chambers of commerce, Kirkwood and Webster chambers of commerce. So we would get feedback from talking to people, and certainly the business people that had enough confidence in us to do some advertising. We got feedback from them, and we got feedback from our readership. We started hearing from people. Our phone would ring, or we had start out with one line and then 2 lines.
Yeah, we've never been
Now
at
bank of phones.
We've never been at a loss for letters to the editor, and that holds true from the time we started to this day. I mean, you could tell by looking at the letters page, and that's one of the most read things in the paper.
Yes.
I know people that wait for the Times because they want to see who's spouting off this week.
That's
about
where they
something.
turn first,
Yeah.
or where they go now online to look and see what's going on there. Now, what if you could go back and, knowing what you know now, what lessons have you learned in starting that you would do differently? Maybe name that cat Elite or...
Oh, that's a hard one.
I'd get a good psychiatrist, I think. That would have helped, some therapy. But actually, there's so much involved in doing it that the time just flies, and we both scratch our heads and say, how could it be 40 years that we've been doing this now?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you must be enjoying what you're doing.
I think it's a lot of fun, and I enjoy the repartee with readers. I was, just this morning I got like 4 or 5 phone calls from people about different things. That story that we have about the ant farm in Webster Groves, I got several calls on that from people who say, "Hey, I want to meet my buddy again from those days. Can you give me his phone number and stuff?" So.
Dwight, any thoughts for you on lessons that you would maybe do differently, or to some budding person out there, some budding journalist who's like, yeah, I'd like to start a newspaper also, not to compete against you guys.
I can give you some advice on that. Don't do it. I try. My kids, they both majored in journalism, and I cautioned them constantly, and they went ahead and did it anyway. So, one's a sports editor at a weekly newspaper in mid-Missouri, and then my daughter's editor in business journalism. So I couldn't talk them out of it. But that would be I would have. If you said what would you do differently, I would have been stronger with my kids and said, "Are you crazy?"
But the stuff's in the blood, though.
It is kind of in the blood.
I've got one son who works for us. He does not have a degree in journalism, but he's currently our distribution manager. He's been with us about 2 years, and he's interested in the business. And
I think what's useful for us is just the whole local thing and staying local, and that's you see so many newspapers around the country having problems, and I really think that's what happened to a lot of bigger newspapers is they forgot what their mission is, and they did different things with cost cutting, and it's hurt the product. And being local is so important. There's a letter in the Post-Dispatch today that writes about how they wish the paper was doing more local things. And I'm not knocking the Post because I got a lot of friends there, but I think that's so important. And Dwight is so active in the community, and there's Jazz Fest coming up, and that's been something that he's worked on for long. We all try to be involved in the community, and I would say Dwight has been particularly good at that.
And that's an interesting comment that you make, because there's a lot of, you can't know everything going on in the community unless you're involved in everything, and then you can't possibly do that either. So to get some news about what's happening in another section of the community or another section of the larger community in the greater St. Louis area, like there are things that are listed sometimes, like I've been at a restaurant and I see the West End Word, pick that up, very similarities, but some different stories because you're covering a different area. But it's nice to know of the stories like this one on the front page. I had no clue about the ant farm. You get a little history, you get a little bit more knowledge, and like you said, some people make contacts with people that they maybe forgot about or lost touch with along the way. But there's good stories in there. There's hard news in there. There's the editorials, the letters to the editor. There's the ads. So the building and the keeping the consistency of a community, I think, is the backbone of one of those things is the paper. Because it really covers all kinds of areas. It covers the arts. It covers crime. So you really kind of are like a nerve center to keep the community vibrant and keep it focused on itself and how to keep it alive.
Yeah, I belong to the International Society of Weekly Newspaper Editors, and they had 3 or 4 of their newspapers go out of business just in the last year. And they're talking about what happens to those communities when the paper's gone. There isn't the watchdog on how your tax money's being used at City Hall, what city councils and boards of aldermen are doing. There's not as much cohesion in community activities. I mean, the people really take ownership of, for example, our calendar. And if they're not in the calendar, if their release didn't get in, they let us know, and they're upset. And I'm tempted to say, hey, this is a free service, man. but boy, it's amazing how people scold us if their chart or their item for the calendar didn't make it into the paper.
But that's also good because you see that people are actually paying attention to the calendar.
Right.
In other sections of the paper.
Right. But, it all gets back to, the only thing that makes this paper possible is the advertisements. That's what pays the bill. That's what carries the freight. And the best thing that people can do for us is to shop local and to let people know when they see their ads in the Webster-Kirkwood Times, that they are responding to that information that they have paid to put in there. That's the key to survival, is if we continue to have advertising support and reader support of advertisers. It's a two-way street, and we have to have that. That's why I'm always saying shop local, shop local. Amazon is not our friend.
Right.
They're
a river.
There's an organization out of Minnesota called 350 Project, and they developed to support brick and mortar businesses, and they say that small businesses, brick and mortar businesses, about I'm trying to pull this out of memory, but something like 60% of that revenue goes back into the community. It might even be a higher percentage than that if it's a locally owned business. A national chain business that's located in your community, maybe 35-40% of that goes back to the community. You buy online, zero goes back to the community.
Right. There's no tax money. There's no the object itself that you're purchasing or things like that. You know, and I see the beauty of, I like to read the classified ads. Like to see the services that are offered there and the people within the community, just like you're talking about, who have some like skilled labor kinds of things, to craftsmen.
Yes.
There's roofing, carpentry, lawn things to an abundance, especially in Webster Groves. The housing kinds of ads, they're all very, they are all focused locally. And it's nice, and I really appreciate what you said there, Dwight, about buying locally, because you are supporting your community. You're keeping your community going, because you can't possibly spend that money outside the community or out of the state or out of the country and expect that the services that you have come to know are going to continue the way they are, because that just doesn't happen. So you're listening to a discussion we're having with Don Corrigan and Dwight Bitikofer from the Webster-Kirkwood Times. We're going to get into more a little bit after the break about them personally and their journeys to this point of the 40th anniversary of the Webster-Kirkwood Times. But you're listening to In Tune. This is Arnold Stricker of In Tune. It's KWRHLP 92.9 FM, your community radio station in Webster Groves. We'll be right back. Welcome back to In Tune. This is Arnold Stricker on KWRHLP 92.9. We have our guest in studio, Don Corrigan and Dwight Bitikofer from the Webster-Kirkwood Times, celebrating 40 years of a great paper. And off air, we were talking about the importance of really understanding that whole publishing process and getting a paper going. And I mentioned off air that you guys were probably taking the pictures back then, developing them. You were doing everything and understanding nowadays how a paper is rolled out when it's rolled out on a MacBook, and that copy is sent then to the printer. Understanding the quote unquote old school type really gives you a publishing, not a history, but the intricacies of really making it work. You guys want to comment on back from our off-air discussion there?
Well, we still like to see the paper product printed out, laid out. We still have the old layout boards, and we still just spread all those pages out and take a good look at them. Try to have everybody in the office look at them, before they're electronically sent to the printer, and just to get that visual image. I think we can see corrections and find mistakes, more easily that way than just on the screen.
And you're also looking for balance visually, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, some of the journalism students that we get in as interns that are younger and they're electronically based, they're sort of amazed when they come back and they see all these boards back there. But like Dwight says, that gives the opportunity for a lot more eyes to look at those pages and make corrections. And there's always been a certain antipathy for advertising salespeople getting involved in the editorial process. But I appreciate when the ad people come by and they say, hey, this is wrong. Hey, my kid plays on the soccer team and I think this coach's name's misspelled. The more eyes, the better. And that wouldn't happen if we didn't have that laid out all over the production room.
That's very interesting, and it shows that you guys accept input from those who you work with, and you're just
Certainly.
not kind of quote unquote lording it over them as the editor or publisher. Like you have to stay in your position.
Yeah, when I was at Mizzou J School, there was this firewall between the advertising people and the editorial people, and they both sort of looked at each other contemptuously, and that's bad. And I think in a community newspaper especially, that's old school. You don't want to still be doing that. So.
Yeah, that's not good for the entire paper as it goes out, because it reflects that. Then.
Well, yeah, and we're all in this together in the battle to keep print and to keep community newspapers going, and so that's an attitude that we sort of fostered at the paper.
Yeah, I really appreciate your backgrounds and what each of you bring to that development of the paper initially. And Dwight, you're a Kansas native, or a native of Kansas.
Yes.
The land of Oz, AHS, not OZ. I had to pull that one out.
Yeah.
But you're a poet. And how has all of those experiences growing up on a farm drawn you to the place where you are now, and in getting the paper going 40 years ago, and now looking back and seeing all the things that you've done?
I used to think back when I was delivering newspapers, which I did, early years for a while, and it was a little bit like planting seeds, like sowing wheat out on the farm. You're hoping for a good crop. You're hoping for response, to the paper. You're hoping, that's going to result in more readers, more advertisers, which is sort of like, depending on the weather for a good crop, out on the farm.
For a good harvest, yeah. And Don, you still work at Webster University, and you have you mentioned you came from Chicago down to here, but your teaching also keeps you in touch with what the latest and greatest things are, supposedly.
That's true.
And it's theory and practice combined.
It is. And sometimes I think, my colleagues at Webster have, when electronics came along, and they were ready to stomp all over the grave of print, and we went at it a lot, and I said, it's not going away. If you study just about every medium, when radio came along, they thought print was going to be dead. When TV came along, they thought radio was going to be dead. Now you have cyberspace and the internet, and we're supposed to be dead. What you see though is each medium sort of adapts to the new situation, and they don't all go away. I don't think print's going to go away anytime soon, but we've changed, and we've also got a website, and we put the material up there, and we put different material up there. So we're not complete Luddites, but the change is something that you've got to adapt to, and it's been fun to be at the teaching journalism and communication at the university level, because they have a different perspective. When you're kind of doing it every day, you're still got your foot in the real world of journalism. It makes for an interesting tension.
Well, it makes for a validation of what you're saying, because you're actually doing it. You can say, yeah, I was involved with this, and we've been doing this for 40 years, so I have some credibility behind what I'm saying.
Even though we are a weekly newspaper, we are still, with our website, we're able to put late breaking news up online, and
right.
we do keep an active website where we do have late breaking things that we post, or information that we didn't know at deadline, at press time, that we can put up there.
And I'm sure people who have moved out of the area, they still want to stay connected
Yes.
to the area. This is one way via the website of the Times to stay in touch. Do you also send these, mail these to people in a subscription kind of manner?
We have a few subscriptions. I mean, our subscriptions are expensive because we mail first class. We used to have third class, and that was not very reliable, and so we just upgraded them to what it costs us to mail them. But we do have a few people that will spend over $100 a year for a subscription, a mailed subscription.
That's great. Now, Dwight, I'm reading an old article on you, and one of the things here is, what is the question you wish people would ask you, and what is its answer? So I'm asking you a question. What's the question you would wish that I would ask you, and what's the answer?
I think in Dwight's case it would be something about advertising. Hey, what's the frequency discount for a year-long ad? I think he'd like that question.
What's the most? I mean, I used to write stories too, and then maybe ask me about the most fun story that I've ever done, or the most important stories that we've ever worked on in the newspaper. One of the stories I enjoyed doing most was I believe his name was Don Miller, the KMOX traffic copter guy who lived in Kirkwood. So I got to go with him on a traffic report once in the helicopter, and that was
hair raising.
That was really, that's the kind of story that I really like to do. Once, back when we used to do more experiential things, Don worked with the Kirkwood garbage people for a few hours.
Yeah, I rode in the back of a trash truck for a day to see what it was like.
That's good firsthand experience.
Amazing going to the landfill. I have to say, I had to breathe through a handkerchief. But Kirkwood, when they let me do it, they made me sign all these liability things in case I got caught in the compactor,
Gee. But that's how you really understand what's going on and really give life to a story.
Yeah, I got to ride in the engine of an Amtrak train from St. Louis to Jefferson City once, and kind of under the guise of doing a story about railroad crossing safety, and we're very much railroad towns, and
right.
The late state representative Bud Barnes from Kirkwood arranged that for me. So I was able to make that trip in the engine. Another time I got to ride in the steam locomotive in the cab of the steam locomotive from out at the Transport Museum downtown. That steam locomotive, 1926 locomotive that was operational for a few years, and they let me blow the steam whistle at the Rock Hill Road crossing.
I was going to say, as you're coming through Webster Groves.
I mean, sometimes we do get to do national and global stories, even though we're a little community newspaper. So, when Bill Clinton came to Webster and George W. Bush came to Kirkwood, we were there with all the national reporters, and we had to get the Secret Service clearance and all that sort of thing, and we got up close and personal with the presidents. So that's something that you wouldn't normally think a community newspaper would get involved in. William Webster, who's head of the FBI, he's a Webster Groves High School grad, so I got to have lunch with him and all of his FBI Secret Service surrounding us at the table. And sometimes we even go global. I know the military asked me one time to go to Bosnia and report on local soldiers who are from our area because they come out through Scott Air Force Base. So I got to do a flight to Bosnia, and
Wow.
It was interesting. There's a woman in Webster Groves who was a pen pal of all these soldiers on this one base in Tuzla, and she said, "Hey, you can handle." She heard about that we were going there. She goes, "Hey, you can personally deliver these letters." So here I am in this camp in Tuzla in Bosnia, and I'd say, "Are you so-and-so?" He goes, "No, but he's over there." So I go, "Well, here's a hand-delivered letter from this woman in Webster Groves. It's right."
Didn't know you were going to be a mailman also. That's a great story. You're listening to Arnold Stricker of In Tune on KWRH-LP 92.9. We have Dwight Bitikofer and Don Corrigan from the Webster-Kirkwood Times in here. Dwight, tell us a little bit about your poetry. I'm always fascinated when with artists and writers like that. What is the impetus of why poetry? Why not short stories, or why not a novel or something like that?
I guess it's the medium that works for me. I've written poetry off and on since grade school. But I mean, I've had long dry periods too where I wasn't doing anything. Started getting involved in open mics about 15 years ago, and just kind of liked the feeling of that, and like the three-dimensional feel of words spoken out loud and seeing people react to the words, and this that performance things, and that led to. It led to teaming up with a local jazz musician, Raven Wolf. Mm-hmm. We do some things together that we call Po Jazz, which is a name borrowed from somebody in Vermont that was doing that kind of thing. But we enjoy doing that kind of performance together. We'll be at the Old Webster Jazz and Blues Festival at the McConnor Gallery at 3:00 on Saturday afternoon, September 15, and we'll have a couple other poet voices with us, and we'll do some performance there for about an hour and a half from 3 to 4:30. At McConnor Gallery, 117 West Lockwood.
There you go. That's a plug. That's a good one. And poetry readings used to be very popular, and have kind of, maybe it's me, but they were very popular in the 60s and 70s, but they kind of died off a little bit unless you went to certain venues, mainly those that were in college towns, like the coffee house or something like that, where they would get a local artist who was going to perform, whether music or do a poetry reading. But do you see that coming back a little bit more now?
St. Louis has a very active poetry scene. Yes, there are open mics all around town. There are a number of different poetry organizations and poetry communities. I've come to realize there's as many different kinds of poetry communities as there are different kinds of Baptist churches. Some are more academic, some are more performance oriented, some are try to be kind of an umbrella organization, and I'm currently on the board of St. Louis Poetry Center, and and involved with that. Currently board president, which is beating my head against the wall about money issues, just like with the business. But,
right.
But so
that's neat. And Don, you've written several books, haven't you?
Yeah, I wrote a show me series of books with Reedy Press. So one was about nature sites in Missouri. One was about the weather, the crazy weather we have in Missouri. And then the other one is on environmental issues, and we have a lot of environmental problems. And the newspaper helped me with all of those because I reported on weather, or I reported on nature, or I reported on the environment, and that's been a lot of fun. And writing those books has also given me a chance to go out and do signings, and it's kind of a labor of love. You don't make a lot of money, but you get a chance to go out and talk to the community and find out what's on their mind, and so I find that to be a lot of fun. Dwight has his poetry, which I think complements the newspaper and the writing well, and I do the book writing on the side. And one of the things that's nice about that too is I've been able to adapt it to my university teaching. So I use all three of those books for a outdoor environmental journalism certificate that students can get in the journalism area at Webster.
So if you had to tell budding journalists something, like a little short statement for them to remember, because sometimes mentors will say something back in a career. I remember my high school band director telling me certain things, and you learn certain things that kind of stick with you. What would they be, Don? What would you tell a budding journalism student to, so when they're your age, they will go, yeah, that was a valuable piece of information and advice that I received?
I would say develop a passion for a beat. Beat reporting has sort of been downplayed a lot in recent years, but really a student should find a passion, whether it's for sports, whether it's for covering the environment, whether it's investigative reporting. Develop a passion for a beat area, because regardless of what medium the stories eventually go on, the important thing is that you have learned to have some expertise in an area. That's always going to serve you well, no matter what, whether we deliver these stories on paper or whether they go out on the internet. That's what's, I think, most important.
Dwight, how about you?
I would say learn to write well, communicate well. Learn to use short sentences. Learn to state things in a way that, woman sitting in a stoplight at a car is going to understand, in a thumbnail sketch, and not, don't require the reader to go all the way through a story to know what the story is about. In the first paragraph, you should have a good idea what the story is going to be about.
Now,
and a lot of people just get their information from headlines, so it's important that the headline, reflects what the story is about and doesn't mislead or sensationalize what the information is.
Thank you for saying that. That was where I was going with that. Is how do you develop a headline for a story to draw people's attention that really encompasses the entire story in a few short words? Of course, that's where poetry, I'm sure, comes in, because you're doing this a very similar thing.
I mean, it's challenging, and I think we don't always hit the mark, but and it's dependent on what fits in the space as well. So, but short words.
I'd give some, and we haven't mentioned our staff people enough, but Kevin Murphy, our managing editor, comes up with these. He's a good Irish witty guy, and he comes up with a lot of headlines that I think draw people in. The one thing that I think is regrettable about where we're at now is that with the internet, it's all about clickbait. It's all about teasing people, and they're usually disappointed when they actually get to the article, when they've been teased that way. And I think we do more traditional journalism, where we try to be as accurate as possible, labeling what the story is about. Dwight was talking about being a good writer, short sentences. I really get a kick out of proofing the paper with Dwight, because I'll get his galleys back, and I love the passion that Dwight has about grammar. If somebody's using between when they should be using among, and I'm sure that's very helpful for a young student journalist to come in and intern, and they see their copy back and they say, well, that's not played up as much in journalism.
It frustrates me that even on National Public Radio, they don't do that correctly.
She and I.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We dealt with that just recently in our obituaries. Even the obituaries are interesting aspect of the paper. I remember there was a Kirkwood resident who wrote this obit about how her mother said, if George W. Bush is elected again, I'm going to die on the inauguration day. And sure enough, her mother did that. And she wrote this long obituary. And we said, well, that really doesn't have a place in the obituary section. We're not going to politicize the obituaries. And she went back and forth with us. Finally, she bought an ad and put her mother's obituary with how she intentionally died on the inauguration day because she was so upset.
Oh my gosh!
Those are some of the things that we deal with.
We will always sell ad space.
Yeah, and it's interesting how grammar, after a while, it becomes to be adopted and accepted. I was actually her and I, which that didn't fly at all.
Yeah.
And I agree with you, Dwight. It's a thing that you learn because it's the correct way to speak. It's the correct way to write. Although it's not being corrected as much anymore.
Also, the other big piece of advice, don't rely on spell check.
Yes. Read it. Proofread it. Because you could have a correctly spelled word there that's totally in the wrong place.
That's not the right word.
Like Thee.
Compliment.
Yeah, and the computers drive me crazy because they'll correct stuff for you.
Yes.
And you'll look at this copy and you go, this is worse than if I didn't have that.
Incorrectly corrected, yes.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, it's been great having you on the show, and I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to be here and to talk a little bit about the founding of the paper, the 40 years that have gone on, a little bit about yourselves, and giving listeners a glimpse into some behind the scenes at the Webster-Kirkwood Times. Thank you very much for coming in, Dwight.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in. Really appreciate it. It's fun to talk to people like these two gentlemen and to get insights into who they are and to what makes things tick. And that's one of the things that we like to do on this show. We like to get people to reflect on exactly what's going on in their community, on some topics and some issues. Some things are a little lighter than others. Some things get pretty heavy. And but at the same time, a community that works together kind of stays together. A community that reads the paper together can stay together. And you know what's going on. And I think one of the things that frustrates me sometimes is that it's tough for people sometimes nowadays to agree to disagree. That many times people have to think that they're right, and they're right at all costs. And what that does is that costs you, and that costs somebody else. And sometimes it costs a friendship. And sometimes it ultimately will cost a community the cohesiveness that it needs to tackle problems that are simple and tackle problems that are complex. So we want you to stay tuned to our second hour. We have the emergency management, St. Louis County Emergency Management, the head of that department is going to be in to talk to us a little bit about that and some emergency planning and things that you can do at home and what the county is doing to help prepare to protect us. But stay tuned. If you have any questions for us, you're always welcome to call us. Text us at 314-736-4510. This is Arnold Stricker of In Tune. You're listening to KWRH LP 92.9 FM, your community radio station in Webster Groves, Missouri. Stay tuned.